Thank you.
Welcome to the 23rd Elizabeth Bennet reading. I'm Charlie Shaw. I'm the Director of Stewardship here in my 43rd year of teaching and administering and a number of things that will go unsaid. And this is a special evening that marks the greatest of the greatest that we can attain in terms of faculty writing and faculty colleagueship. This award has 33 years of existence. The Elizabeth Bennet Award was established to honor a teacher of English at Kingswood School from 1936 to 1968. And Miss Bennet is remembered by her students as having an intense and devoted interest in the usage of the English language and for her remarkable ability to inspire a precise and disciplined use of words in the written expression of thoughts and ideas. And don't forget her love of poetry. This sound like some of your English teachers and biology teachers. The Bennet Award is the inspiration of two former students, Caroline Cross Chinland and Annie Sanders, very faithful attendees of this evening. However, circumstances being what they are due to flooding in Pennsylvania and circumstances in New York make their attendance impossible tonight. But I send a shout out to both of you, Caroline and Andy, from Annie, from this wonderful filled room. There are always previous Bennet Award winners that cheer on their colleagues. If you are a former Elizabeth Bennet Award winner, would you stand for a moment, please? Thank you. And I wonder, are there any students of Elizabeth Bennet here tonight? Well, there are. Well, would you please identify yourself? Please stand. Former teacher.
Miss Bennet students?
Yes, former students of Miss Bennet. There are just a couple of really precious nuggets about Miss Bennet, and I always have to choose from among so many of them. I've always been delighted by the comment that she wrote of a student, and you know that for faculty members, the writing of a comment is an act of it's a leap of faith, and sometimes it's packed with black arts. But this is such an incredible comment that has sweetness and also saltiness. Her work is thoughtful and mature, and she contributes much to class discussion. Occasionally, she indulges in fine writing, a detriment to her usual clarity of expression. Oh, I love that. Or, teaching is drudgery and frustration, also the pleasure of seeing an idea caught and tossed back with embellishment, or amidst the welter of misspellings and awkward sentences, of finding an expression so imaginative, and so compactly phrased that you wish you could have said it yourself. This one I just learned recently. Thank you, Susan. In 1981, two Kingswood classmates were in North Carolina where Miss Bennett was recovering from an illness in the hospital, and so they decided to visit her. The girls were led by a nurse to Miss Bennett's bedside, where she was apparently unconscious and had not spoken for some time. The nurse said, "Well, she's just laying there, resting." To which the suddenly aroused Miss Bennett said, "Just lying there." So we'll perform our annual inversion, and Bob Green, the winner of last year's Elizabeth Bennett Award, will read first. So Bob Green is an overflowing of goodness and sweetness, and especially remarkable about him is the sense of wonder that he exudes. Everything that is important to Bob is somehow about craft, and craft is about everything. Bob is a craftsman of wood and a craftsman of language, and I'll just indulge reprising my observation from a previous comment about Bob, that under his eye, nature writes of its own craftswomanship. I wonder what Miss Bennett would have to say about that. It's a little surprised that Bob is a prolific writer about nature, as one can glean from his book, Talking to Myself. Bob is most at home around streams and turtles and worms. Emptiness is a friend to him. Since his arrival in 1982, Bob has always cared very, very deeply about the writing and the creativity of our students. And in his classroom, biology and life are really interpenetrating and inseparable. Bob always writes and thinks about things that are right in front of us, the simplest of things like track and cross country and the back country and white water and birds and tonight Bob shares two short stories. In the story A Promise Kept, a childhood event is privately and silently recalled by an ancient and failing dementia patient. It examines the myriad of human interactions that over time come to define the essence of a person. And in his second piece, Endings, is a mostly true portrait of a free-spirited college friend who viewed life as a series of stories, each brought into focus by its ending. Where are you? Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Charlie. First, I'd like to thank Carolyn Chinlin and Annie Sanders for making the Bennett opportunity possible. And I'd also like to thank Susan and Charlie and Noel for all they do to make it happen. These are two stories. They seem at first nothing alike, but they are loosely related. Actually, I didn't realize that until after I had written them, and yeah, there is a theme here. Okay, the first one is called A Promise Kept. Do you think he can hear us? she asked. I think so, her brother responded, but I don't think he can process anything. So sad, she whispered. Jack's mind wrestled a thought as he stared out the window and absently watched the rain. A distant street lamp, backlit drops pattering the glass. The room was silent but for the creaking of the old man's rocking chair and some distant, hushed whispers he couldn't quite decipher. Jack was on the verge of speaking, his mind casting about for a place to start. He gazed around the room, eyes stopping to rest here and there, the mahogany desk, an array of leather-bound books, the light beyond his window. He glanced at young Benjamin seated cross-legged on the floor in the corner of the darkened room. Had the boy been there even a moment before? He seemed always just to appear. The friendship that had recently developed between them puzzled him. He just sits there rocking, holding that thing. What is that anyway? She asked. It's an old compass, leather pouch, replied her brother. It seems to mean something to him, she said. No, he said. Jack's gnarled thumb stroked the leather pouch containing the compass he'd treasured since he was Benjamin's age. His body straightened as the story welled up within him. The creaking chair seemed an extension of his bones. He slowly lowered his eyes from the street lamp to the compass resting in his hand. He chose his words carefully. I was 9. My best friend, his name was Ben too, was a bit older than me. Your age, maybe. He wore dirty sneakers and dungarees, streaked with lawn and earth, ripped at the knees. I remember him, swift and sure and agile, a quick young wind skimming over low hills, sneakers a whispering blur scattering the fragile parachutes of old dandelions. He was my hero. What's that he's mumbling, she asked. I can't make out the words. Nothing, replied her brother. He's just making sounds. It's as though he's speaking to someone, she said. Just sounds. Jack looked directly at the boy, measuring him. Benjamin, he said, take this. Promise you'll treasure it. The youth nodded solemnly, his eyes locked on the nicked, worn, oily brown pouch. Nimble young hands extended to old, withered hands. What was that? Asked the woman who had turned away for just a moment. Nothing, said her brother. He just dropped the compass. No harm done. Benjamin retreated from the chair and knelt over the instrument, probing with eyes, fingers, and mind. Several heartbeats later, Jack continued his tale. One moonlit night, Ben and I snuck down the old mine shaft near town. He shook his head. Ben always carried that compass. We inched farther and farther down the shaft. Inky blackness wrapped itself around us like a nightmare. Soon, timbers creaked, warned us away, the dead shaft resenting this invasion of its slumber. I froze. Ben searched through the thick blackness and located me, a tiny, wretched speck of awareness in a collapsing universe. His easy voice coaxed me back to my wits. Are you sure he's not trying to say something? She asked. I might have heard the word compass, but no, he's well beyond speaking, he said. The room darkened as night stealthily crept in, the street lamp casting rain shadows on the wall. Jack wondered at Benjamin's silence. He knew the boy was listening. In the faint light, Ben huddled over the instrument, clicking this piece up, flipping that one, locking and unlocking the solid catch for the dial floating beneath the thick glass face, south, west, north. It was at home in his hands. Ben's voice thawed the chill in my guts, Jack continued. In the close darkness, I heard him rummage through his sack. A moment later, he pressed the leather pouch with his prized compass into my hand. "Here, buddy," I heard him say, "you lead." His hands grabbed my shoulders and turned me to face the path out of that hole. "But I can't see," I remember crying. Ben's chuckle reassured me, though I'm sure he battled the same dread that clutched me. "No matter," he said, "just hold it out in front of you and let it guide the way. I'll be right behind you. I promise." "He seems agitated," said Jack's daughter. "He's rocking faster." "Could be the meds," replied the brother. "The doctor said they might do that." I managed to squeeze out small drops of courage from somewhere, and I took a step. Jack continued. I took a second, a third. Walking was mechanical. I felt the compass out in front, guiding, pulling, urging me up and out. Ancient air with a life of its own thickened and swirled clouds of stale earth into my chest. A beam crashed nearby and something died within me. I moved forward and up. Time oozed about me. "Did the doctor mention anything more to you about the course of his condition, what we should expect?" he asked. "She said it will progress quickly now. He's lost so much cognitive functioning," she said. "What do you think is going on in his mind?" asked the brother. "Oh, nothing at all," replied the sister, shaking her head. My eyes stopped burning. I gulped a mouthful of cold, clean night air and felt it splash away the acrid searing in my lungs. I turned to share this wash of relief. I waited an eternity. I tried to return to the shaft, but it had closed its horrible mouth around its young prey. I held the compass out in my hand and my tears welled up. Ben never emerged. He had broken the most important promise he had ever made. "We didn't get to know him well enough," said the old man's daughter. "Sure we did. We knew him when we were kids, and then in a different way as we became adults. We were a close family," said the old man's son. "What do you know of his childhood?" she asked. He was quiet for a while. He watched his dad rocking back and forth, back and forth. "Nothing," he finally answered. The ancient man dropped his eyes to the large hands clutching his knees and eased his grasp. He studied the swelled knuckles, the thick, meandering veins, the translucent, discolored, finely wrinkled skin. He listened to the sound of the rain on the glass and the steady, rhythmic straining of the old rocker. The distant whispers of familiar voices played at the edges of his awareness, but he couldn't place the words or identify the speakers. "What do you think is left of him?" asked Jack's son. "Only what exists in our own minds," Jack's daughter replied. "I don't follow," he said. "Sometimes I think we're more than just our bodies," she said. "You mean a soul? Look, you know I'm not religious." "No," she cut him off. "I don't know about souls. I figure I'll find out soon enough. No, I mean, we're also sort of what's in other people's minds, what they think of us, what they remember about us, the experiences we've had together. It's like over time we become a living tapestry where our bodies they're just focal points for all the millions of threads radiating out from us and connecting us with other people. Once we're gone, dead or," she looked at her dad for a few awkward moments, "or gone," she managed to choke out, "the tapestry remains for as long as people remember us." He looked at his dad for a while and nodded. Jack watched as, in the corner, youthful fingers moved about the compass, like some colorful young spider building its first web. Benjamin turned a tiny knob on the side, adjusted a ring about the upper rim of the instrument. He inspected it carefully, then looked up at Jack and held the man's tired gaze with his bright, eternally bright young eyes. The compass rested comfortably in Ben's hand. He raised it, aligning the old man in the fine wire sights. An impish grin grew on his face, and the boy in the dirty sneakers and the ripped dungarees spoke. I never lied to you, Jackie. I still exist because of you. This is called Endings. It was my turn to tell a story, so I said I'd talk about a guy named Dick I knew in college. Dick was big on endings. He said if you could recognize a good ending, then a good story probably preceded it. It was the late 60s, and Dick wore wire-rimmed glasses, patched jeans, a red bandana he'd lifted from a roaming dog, and he wore clogs. He always wore clogs. 6 of us shared a house, and Dick had a snake named Oosh who often escaped his cage. We'd usually find him on the stereo's turntable. He enjoyed spinning. Late one night, we were all unbearably hungry. That meant we had to sneak onto the university's experimental apple orchard, which entailed tiptoeing across a pasture of horses, young and wild. Once across, we loaded bags and bags with apples of all kinds and colors there in the bright moonlight, then made our way across half the pasture, arms full. A thunder assaulted our senses, and wild stallions, nostrils flared and manes flying, bore down on us, craving apples. Dick yelled, "Run!" and off we went, diving finally over the fence on the far side of the pasture. Dick wore clogs. We turned and watched as Dick disappeared over a slight hill, wild horses hot on his tail. We re-hopped the fence and topped the rise, wondering how we would help and what Dick would look like after the stampede. We saw Dick surrounded by horses. They were sharing apples, and Dick was talking to them like he'd known them forever. It was a good ending, he told us later. 2 nights later, we had to raid the orchard again because Dick had heard it was easy to make pies from apples, and we had aluminum foil and a hot plate, so why not? And we had fun the other night, didn't we? Dick brought a radio, and while up in the apple trees, he turned it on. A Rolling Stones song, one Dick claimed Oosh liked, came on, and Dick turned up the volume while we all went shh, which he couldn't hear over the music. A security guy materialized and told us we were in big trouble and turn off the radio and come down from those trees. Dick turned the volume even higher and began a clog dance on the limb of the tree. This picture is clearly etched in my mind. It's the only one I really have of Dick. The guard turned red and said, "Stay where you are," and he ducked into the shack to make a telephone call, and Dick yelled, "Run," and we did. We stopped when we heard the fading volume of the radio become suddenly louder. Dick had remained in the tree and was dancing still. And we called, "Come on," but he yelled back, "After the song." We snuck back and heard Dick telling the guard about the time he'd gotten into trouble for fishing on private property, and the two of them laughed and munched apples like they'd known each other forever. It was a good ending, he told us later. Dick was older than the rest of us. He graduated and joined the Peace Corps and went to Africa. He wrote us 2 letters, and the first one said everything was great and he liked the people, and we wouldn't believe how little they had and how pleasant they were to each other. The second one said they were having some troubles and there was some unrest, and he really thought he could do something to ease things up a bit. We didn't get more letters, and the ones we wrote to Dick came back, so we checked with people who'd know where to find him. We were told Dick wouldn't be getting mail anymore. I'm wondering if he didn't, along the way, there in Africa, make some guard laugh and maybe ease things up a bit for the pleasant people. It would have been a good ending. The people I was talking to said it was a good story, and I bit into an apple and said it was mostly true, especially the ending. So.
Gives me great pleasure to introduce our second reader of the evening, this year's winner of the Elizabeth Bennett grant, Jordan Rawson. For as long as I can remember, there's a slight preamble, my colleague David Watson was on a quest to find his successor as advisor to the Crane. And after years of going through this in spring ritual of listening to David, I thought to myself, David, you know, you are not the Dalai Lama, and it is not your job to find your own successor. And it was unfailing that every spring David would begin to go through the omens and all the signs and begin to think about his, mortality and begin to fret about, who was going to, be the next advisor to the paper. So it was really fitting that one spring David declared that we do have the perfect reincarnation of the advisor to the Crane. So when Jordan arrived in 2015, there were many heralds, and it was really almost, it was a nativity kind of event. It was quite amazing. We're glad you're here. The Crane Gang has immediately latched on to Jordan. The terms journalist and hard-boiled no longer go together. His combination of kindness and smarts and a slightly deranged sense of humor announce a new Crane mojo. We hear that he is a whiz at recruiting and keeping wonderfully talented new students, that he is a genius for procuring Timbits and hot and readies from Little Caesars, while keeping the Crane Room at the high journalistic standard that the Columbia Scholastic Press Award continues to award a gold medal. Jordan is at once sweet and goofy and also a stern taskmaster. I'm told also a bit of a perfectionist who will proofread he will proofread before, during, and after production, and has dreams about the paper, I would imagine. He is said to be an inveterate tinkerer also. Law school seemed to be a preordained path for Jordan until he answered some voice that led him away from an anointed place at the U of M Law School to go to the highly prestigious University of Montana MFA program. It's a very acclaimed writing program. Jordan did come back and finish law school and actually practiced with a firm, but never was able to purge himself of the writing and the teaching that he had done in Montana. Now, all of those who know Jordan know that by universal accord, he is a dynamic and beloved member of the English department and beloved English teacher, generous beyond all calculation with students. Jordan's fiction has been published in Colorado Review, the Los Angeles Review, the Baltimore Review, 14 Hills, and elsewhere. He also won the highly coveted Hopwood Award at Michigan, and he is currently working on a collection of stories and a novel. We're thrilled to hear from Jordan Rawson tonight.
Thanks, Charlie. That was so nice. Hello. Can you guys hear me? All right. Alex, if I am too quiet, you're going to go like this. All right. All right. Thanks. Charlie, thank you very much for the introduction. I, too, like to see myself as David Watson's reincarnation, so I'm glad that you also saw that. Bob, thank you very much for reading. It was lovely. I'm so glad to be reading with you. I feel like you exude goodness, as Charlie said. Thank you to the Bennett funders, Dr. Chinland and Annie Sanders. I'm sorry you couldn't be here today, but I'm really grateful for the grant. Thanks to Noel and Jacob and the other CK administrators. Thanks to my friends who traveled here from Ann Arbor and Lansing and other places. I want to also give a special thank you to the CK English department. I've got to say I'm totally smitten with my colleagues. I think that they have more intelligence in their pinky fingers than I do in my entire body, which is great for me and maybe a drag for them, but they're wonderful. And lastly, my mother is here. She flew in from Maryland. She birthed me and raised me, and she didn't freak out when I told her I was leaving law school to go to Montana, at least not on the outside. So for that, I'm grateful. I wrote a new story this summer, and then I revised an older one, and it's the revision that I'm going to read today. I've always been interested in how people react to adversity, and I reached out to a stranger online and talked to him over the phone at length because the person had the same disability as the protagonist of the story. And so his name is Wes. He's a great guy, and I'm grateful that he was so willing to be open to me about his experience. And I've tried to be honest and true to what he told me. So the story is called Speed Walking. On the Saturday before Memorial Day, Faye meets Olson at the cottage to repair their marriage and to celebrate their inaugural prosthetic legs. He answers the door in a pair of mesh gym shorts. The vinegary smell of sweat drifts out onto the porch. "You're wearing a cocktail dress," he says. "I wasn't sure what the plan was." He doesn't have on his prosthetic, and behind him she can see a workout bench and a few barbells in the middle of the living room. "I brought a bottle of Jim Beam, too," she says, "in case we wanted to stay in. Since when do you lift weights?" He smiles, like he knows how the evening will go, and hops to the kitchen to make the drinks. When he comes back, alcohol spilling over the sides of the glasses, he checks her out, top to bottom. "To the nines," he says. "In answer to your question, I got the equipment last month from the physical therapy place." "Your body's now your temple," Faye says. "Exactly," Olson says. "You'll be the next Oscar what's-his-name, that South African amputee runner." "Pistorius," says Olson. He flexes his bicep. Faye feels enormous gratitude to be here, to be sitting on the couch with Olson and drinking bourbon like everything is copacetic. At the same time, the casualness feels wrong. It feels somehow formal and distant. They should be fighting. Fighting would be intimate. Fighting seems necessary. "About your decision to move out and stay here," she says, already warmed by the alcohol, emboldened by it. "I mean, it's not like we didn't get along all right before the accident. We can say that for sure, can't we?" Olson holds up a hand. "I'm not interested in this setup," he says, this line of questioning, investigator and the suspect. "Isn't it true that blah, blah, blah? If that's what you're wanting, you came to the wrong place." Faye looks down at the carpet. That's precisely what she's wanting, and it seems already like she's made a mistake in coming over. She stands, tests her weight on the prosthetic limb, making sure the seal is vacuum tight. She puts her glass on the end table. "Welp," she says, "but at least stay for one drink. Olson says. Here, I'll get my leg. He goes off to the bedroom, and Faye takes stock of their cottage, the wood-paneled walls and thick carpeting. It looks how it always does when they've stayed here in the past, except for the workout equipment and a half-deflated get-well balloon hovering above the floor. When he returns, she can tell from his gait that he's better at it than she is. She's had difficulty learning to use hers. She still can't always bend at the knee and ends up clunking around, stiff-legged, like Frankenstein's monster. At first, her residual limb sweated so much that she sometimes slipped out of the prosthetic. She'd be walking to the copier and just lose a leg. She hated having to reassemble herself in front of her coworkers, so now that she's better at detecting the warning signs, the loosened suction cup, air seeping through the seal, she gingerly walks to the bathroom to deal with it, the same way she did in the 6th grade when she started her cycle. Go Red Wings, Olson says. He lifts up his shorts to reveal the Red Wings logo emblazoned on his leg's suction cup. Looks great, she says. They bought the Harley last August as a 2-year anniversary gift, but during the 4-week safety course, Olson had a change of heart and dropped out. I feel free enough in the Jeep with the top down, he said. But Faye continued on, and in the fall rode the bike along US 31, sand dunes and Lake Michigan to the west. She didn't ride it during the winter, but once the snow melted in early March, she wanted to take it for a spin. She wanted Olson to come with her. She does not remember their left legs getting pinned underneath the bike and crushed, but she remembers thinking she was taking the turn too fast, drifting too close to the outside shoulder and overcompensating. She remembers Olson's grip around her tightening. He was in the hospital for 8 days, a quick turnaround. She was in for 15. When she returned home and found him gone and phoned to see where he was, he told her he'd moved into the cottage. I only brought my laptop, a duffel bag of clothes, and our crock pot, he said. I'm not sure how long I'll be here. For the next several weeks, Faye took extra vacation time and stayed home. She dealt with the insurance paperwork, left Olson a string of apology voicemails, and mourned the loss of her leg. She did not allow friends or coworkers to visit. She wanted no one to see her limping around, bruised and weepy, although occasionally a salesman showed up. The first time, it caught her by surprise. I had no idea you people still existed, she said, and got suckered into buying a subscription to Body and Science. She was fitted with her artificial limb once her lower thigh had shriveled to the size of a fist. She bought 2 of them, one for walking and one for running. Together, they cost the same as the motorcycle, even with her health insurance, and had names that sounded to her like Star Wars characters. Autobot 3D, Sea-Leg 3R80. She opted for the computerized knee, and at night, she plugged her legs into outlets to charge next to her cell phone. I may decide to get my right leg amputated, Olson says now. They are sitting at the kitchen table, finishing their second drink, depending on how many problems the nerve damage gives me in the future. He's taken off his prosthetic to apply anti-chafing lotion, and the residual limb is making rotations at the edge of his chair. He doesn't acknowledge the limb's movement, and it seems as though it has a mind of its own. It looks similar to hers, fatty and dimpled, with a tremendous scar of cross stitches at the end like a baseball. In the hospital, Faye hoped for injuries more severe than Olson's, and even now she sometimes wants to lose her other leg, for Olson to be the cause of her losing it. Faye says, I read an article the other day about scientists designing a prosthetic limb controlled entirely by neurotransmitters, brain-controlled prosthetics. They've been trying to do that for 30 years, Olson says. Oh, Faye says, the article didn't mention that. Do you have phantom pains? He says. Only at night, in bed, she says. They haven't been that bad. Mine are getting worse. He knocks back the rest of his drink. I sleep next to a bottle of muscle relaxers. Olson, she says, let's go home. Let's get your clothes and your computer and go home. And the crock pot, he says. Yes, Faye says, the crock pot too. We'll make comfort food for the rest of our lives. We'll make lasagna. We'll make meatloaf. We'll make mac and cheese. She isn't close to anyone else in the world, not really, and the thought of being with someone new is unfathomable. I don't know what to do, he says quietly. He scratches the side of his head where he has an expanding patch of white hair, coarse and gleaming. It does feel strange to live alone. Faye thinks about this. At some point, she says as a joke, I started talking to my residual limb. It was like my new best friend. I could tell her anything and she would never judge me. Eventually, it stopped being a joke. Maybe it was never a joke. Am I crazy? No, Olson says. I cope my own way. At the grocery store, people keep thanking me for my service to our country. They assume I lost my leg in Iraq or Afghanistan, and I don't correct them. I can understand why you wouldn't, Faye says. Easier to smile and nod. But sometimes I do more than smile and nod. Sometimes I strike up the conversation. They have family members over there, and I'm able to comfort them. You're looking at a soldier from the 305th Combat Sustainment Battalion. Olson pours more Jim Beam, seems suddenly pleased with himself. Isn't it weird that I do that? I think it's weird and deceitful, she says. Hey, Olson says, how the hell would you react? I have no idea. Smile and nod, like I said. And then what? They keep pressing, and you realize they want to form a connection. You're going to refuse them that? I guess I'd try to form a connection without creating an alternate identity. Olson takes a drink. Have you thought about what you'd do if someone broke into our house and found you there with a missing leg? I suppose you'd smile and nod. No, she says. I'd start guffawing and tugging on my ears until I scared him away. Hilarious, says Olson. Me? I'm going to buy a nice little handgun and put it in the nightstand. They spend the next half hour in the living room not talking. Faye checks her work email while Olson does a round of physical therapy. He sells homeowners insurance over the phone to people who will never know he's an amputee. Her work situation is different. She handles the intake interviews for a charity that provides cleft palate surgery to toddlers of low-income families, and the families now seem more willing to trust her. They seem more willing to consider her an expert, and she wonders if the missing leg is the cause. Olson refills their drinks and sits beside her on the sofa. They're halfway through the Jim Beam. I'm getting drunk, he says. I'm already drunk, she says. I'm sorry about earlier, he says. I've got passive aggressiveness up the ass these days. Sometimes I just have aggressive aggressiveness. Olson takes his laptop and shows her videos of himself putting his prosthetic limb on and off. He tells her he's thinking of posting them on YouTube as a sort of how-to for new amputees. But I've got to be careful, he says. Porn companies troll YouTube looking for that sort of thing. The videos could end up on a website with men watching me and jerking off. Your videos would get the most views, Faye says. She's beginning to enjoy herself again. Who got you the get well balloon? Aunt Ruth. She stopped by with Lily, who asked if there were amputees in heaven. Olson shrugs. I want amputees up there. I don't want it to be all vanilla. There are amputees in heaven. They just have top-notch prosthetic limbs, so you would never know. Of course, sometimes they choose not to wear a limb at all. They're like, fuck it, this is me. Olson drinks from his glass. When they visited, Lily kissed the prosthetic leg and said it tasted like a coin. Let me see, Faye says. She leans down and kisses the metal swivel joint that serves as his left kneecap. It's true. It tastes like a silver dollar. Yeah? What does it smell like? She presses her nose against the metal. It smells cleaner than a coin, she says. It smells like a knife. Really, Olson says. He's peering at her. He takes his hand and rubs her shoulder under the strap of her dress, and then they are on the carpet, groping and biting. Faye registers the occasional clink of their prosthetics, but she ignores it. She moves to his actual foot and starts kissing it, working her way to his calf and then his thigh. When she looks up at Olson, he is staring blankly at the ceiling. Are you okay? She says. Should I stop? Yes, I'm okay, he says. Yeah, you should stop. They sit up. Eventually, she says, You're upset. Christ, Faye, I just told you I was fine. Are you sure? For the 18th time, yes. Don't ask me again. He swats at the get well balloon, and it bobs across the room. I only asked you twice. I didn't ask you 18 times. Olson grabs his drink and downs it, chews on some ice. What can I do to help? Faye asks. He slaps her across the face. It isn't hard, but it stuns her. Her mouth begins to water the way it does right before she vomits. Olson starts to cry. I'm an ass, he says. I'm an ass, I'm an ass. He goes into the kitchen and comes back with an ice pack, but she doesn't take it. Maybe you think I deserve that, she says. Olson nods, still crying. In her dizzy mind, she can't tell if she thinks she deserved it. What she knows is that she needs to leave. I'm going to the beach, she says. I'm going to sober up, and then I'm going home. Sand can destroy the leg's computer circuit, so she goes to her car and exchanges her prosthetic for her crutches. She makes her way down to the beach boardwalk, the crutches thudding against the wood. The wind is blowing off Lake Michigan, and the air feels muddy and electric. She sits on the sand. When Olson comes down, he has a beach towel and the ice pack. He sits beside her. Faye says, you need a special cover if you're going to wear your leg on the beach. How's your jaw? He asks. Olson, if you'll always resent me, then that's that. There isn't anything I can do. I know, he says. I don't think I'll always resent you, but we're going to grate on each other. We're going to get indifferent to the other's problems. We'll stop being able to stick up for each other. Speak for yourself, Faye says. I could stick up for you. She means it. Even with what just happened, she'd be able to stick up for him. But you wouldn't know how. At the grocery store, this 14-year-old brat was staring at my prosthetic, and then he called me a sad jackass. I would always stick up for you, Faye says. Test me if you want. Imagine you're that 14-year-old. Have him give you shit. In what way, Olson says. In whatever way you want. I would do something. Olson seems to consider this for a while, and then, without warning, he points at an imaginary version of himself by the water. You're a sad jackass, he yells. Lie down and I'll make you a leg out of sand. He sounds angry, authentic, and Faye is mesmerized by the transformation. Kill yourself if you're able, he says now, because you'll do nothing but fuck up society. It occurs to her that she's got a part to play, and yet Olson shows no sign of letting up. The act seems rehearsed instead of improvised. Silly amputee trying to do stuff, he says. That's just silly. He begins to laugh, slow and scornful. Whoa, she says. Jesus, already a bad performance. She doesn't know what else to add. If this were a real play, the audience would know she'd forgotten her lines. Finally, she says, keep laughing, guy. My pleasure, Olson says. Keep laughing, you pencil dick. No problem, Olson says. Keep laughing, you puny fuck, unathletic little virgin. You might find yourself in the same situation, the same or worse. Hopefully worse, since you think his situation is funny, you piece of shit. Olson starts to clap, and Faye looks at him, startled. Her heart is beating fast. She's out of breath and doesn't feel well. That was something, Olson says. That's when the 14-year-old assaults me and steals my limb, she says. I think I drank too much. I think I might puke. A few grand down the drain, Olson says. More than that, actually, since a replacement leg wouldn't be covered by insurance. It would be fine, she says, if the kid stole my limb, I mean. Faye's nausea gets worse for a moment and then passes. She's not feeling terrible. She's feeling okay, in fact. Let the kid steal her prosthetic, unusable to him. She would get fitted for another leg, a better leg, one that's controlled by neurotransmitters, one not designed for a flat world. Thank you.
Well, certainly one of the grandest evenings we've shared at this occasion before. I'm so thankful to you, Bob. Thank you for those two wonderful, wonderful stories. Jordan, thank you so very much. Please stay along and have conversation and enjoy some more of the evening. Thank you very much tonight.